What is up, YouTube? This is your boy, the original Renaissance man, Devon DaVinci, and right now I'm gonna react to a video that honestly I don't even expect it to get a lot of views, but this is just something that I think a lot of people need to see. This is a channel that I tend to watch. This is Knowing Better. There's a guy, he really, it's almost like he's a historian. He goes back and looks at different types of things, like different types of arguments and stuff for things and where they originated from and stuff like that. Like, he looks back at Christopher Columbus and looks at whether or not he was a monster or whether he was just a discoverer, and he really like takes a lot of evidence and things like that. This one we're going to be reacting to is called What Happened to the News, because a lot of people look into like this whole news situation and the whole fake news and biased news and things like that. I'm gonna go ahead and leave a few comments afterwards because it's kind of a long video, but I'm gonna jump right into it. But this explains what happened with the news and why it's not the same as when it, like in the 50s and 60s, when you had Walter Cronkite and then later Dan Rather and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get into it and check and see what he has to say about it.
So this year, fake news has become quite a big issue. In truth, it's been an issue for a few years, at least for those of you paying attention. But it seemed to really come out of its shell this year with the election, possibly even swaying the results. So let's talk about it. We're going to focus on television and internet news here because anything before that is basically prehistory and doesn't matter. When the news first started, there were only the big three: ABC, NBC, and CBS. In 1970, PBS was started and publicly funded. It's basically the closest thing the US has to a state-run channel. But back to the big three. They were all basically the same, and you could basically trust any of them. They were all pretty basic. They competed on getting the story
Sesame
most
Street
correct
was
and most
state-run propaganda.
There was no such thing as getting it first, since all the news shows were basically at the same time. Journalism was an honorable profession, and the men who sat behind the desk were some of the most powerful people in the country, and strangely only ever used that power for good. There was one problem, though.
Congress would allow the fledgling networks free use of taxpayer-owned airwaves in exchange for one public service. That public service would be 1 hour of airtime set aside every night for informational broadcasting, or what we now call the evening news. Congress failed to include in its deal the one requirement that would have changed our national discourse immeasurably for the better.
The news was a public service. Nothing is more important to a democracy than a well-informed, well-educated electorate, which is why we also have public schools. Anyway, while television stations were willing to take a financial loss on their mandatory hour of news each day, they soon realized that they could sell prime advertising real estate during that hour. An hour when everyone, young or old, regardless of what TV shows they like to watch, would be watching. And soon, television news became about the ratings. The news became flashier and more dramatic. There were still only the four competitors, so they weren't really stepping too far outside of the realm of acceptability, though. And while the news was still the information you needed to know, they occasionally threw in the stuff that you just wanted to know. You could still trust them to do their due diligence and get a story right, though, because they had all day to prepare for it and they only had once or twice to tell you about it. Everyone was consuming basically the same apple. People may have preferred to get their news from Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw, but the two anchors saw themselves as equals, not competitors. And when you saw someone else at work, you knew they were eating basically the same apple. So you might have had different opinions on things, but you were basing those opinions on the same set of facts. Nobody was thinking, oh, you watch CBS? What's wrong with you? You must be brainwashed. No, CBS was the channel for old people because it was boring. But really, it didn't matter whether you got your news from an old guy sitting at a desk in front of a red background or an old guy sitting at a desk in front of a blue background, as long as you weren't watching PBS, because PBS didn't have to compete for advertisers, so they were boring as shit. But all that changed with cable. Now, at first, cable news was just CNN, the appropriately named cable news network. But it really began to change when MSNBC and Fox News came around in the late 90s. If you ate your apples before like everyone else, but you really liked it when you occasionally found a sweet one, you were in luck. You didn't expect it all the time, but it was a nice little surprise. Enter cable news. All sweet apples all the time, just how you like it. None of that boring middle stuff, and especially none of those sour ones. Wait, that guy likes sour apples? What's wrong with him? He's clearly getting the wrong news and is clearly a moron. And that's where we are now. You can choose the news you get. How you get it, who presents it, and what spin they put on it. Right-wing news for right-wing people, sour apples for sour people. And since they're in direct 24-hour competition with each other, they often make it a point to report on the mistakes of the others. Something that would have been unheard of when it was just the big three. They even take it a step further by telling you how bad those sour apples really are for you and how lazy those sour apple people really are. Hardly anyone watches the boring middle apples anymore, the nightly news on the big three. The ones who take the time to pick which stories are important because they only have a half hour to tell it to you, and they make sure they get it right. By the time the nightly news comes on, you've already heard about it from the 24-hour networks or the internet all day. The cable news networks aren't competing for your attention by being accurate, they're competing by being first, or by serving a specific demographic. And this problem has only been amplified by the internet. There are only a few players when it comes to television news, but on the internet there are literally thousands. And the bias is real. It starts at the bottom with the most innocuous form of bias, simply choosing which stories to tell or not tell based on what your demo wants to hear. And it goes all the way up to outright lies. With all of these sources out there and with all of them biased in some way, it's hard to tell what the truth really is.
I know I'm not talking a lot. I know it's supposed to be a reaction and everything, but I really want this guy to get his, this information out because this is something I feel like a lot of people need to listen to. I'll leave my comments for after the video's over.
Sometimes it takes night before the due date college paper level research to figure out what's really going on, and most people simply don't have the time. Most people have one or two sources and their friends. Sources they've picked because they like them, and friends they keep because they agree with them, thus fulfilling your confirmation bias and creating the echo chamber. But let's stop talking about the doom and gloom of news, and just focus on the doom. There are 4 types of fake news. The lowest form is sensationalism. This is when the news will pick the most eye-catching headline, often putting their own spin on it. The headline is the first, and sadly often the only, thing a person will read. Whether it's the name of the link you sent them, the big words under the anchor's head, or the top of a newspaper article. The headline contains most of the power. So let's look at an example. Obama passes sweeping healthcare reform, helping millions. Government takeover of healthcare enacted by Obama. These two are about the same event, and the way the news chooses to present the headline will change the way people think about it, whether they read the story or not. Oftentimes the story itself, if people make it that far, is full of spin as well. This is also where clickbait comes in. The headlines that read, "You won't believe what happens next," or "What he said next will shock you," or when they use a barely related picture of a supermodel to catch your attention. I mean, not my attention because I don't objectify women like that, but other people's attention. Advertisers do this too with some sort of quiz that only 3% of people can pass. You want to see if you're part of that special 3%. And once you're taking the color quiz,
Instagram and stuff like that,
you probably won't notice that it's full of ads. And then you can share the fact that you're smarter than 90% of Harvard students with your friends on Facebook, so even more people can see those ads. Which brings us to the second form of fake news, sponsored content. Also called native advertising or branded content. John Oliver does a fantastic segment about this that you should check out. But basically it's when an advertiser pays someone to write a news article or make a YouTube video and make it look like every other article or video, but also make sure to mention their product.
Hi, I'm Craig. Welcome to the salon. Did you know that people used to believe that brass instruments caused hair loss? And that's the first of many hair myths that the scientists at Head & Shoulders are helping us clear up in today's episode so I can condition you to stop telling hair lies.
Hail corporate. Now this example isn't news, but it is educational and informative content, so you shouldn't reasonably expect that there would be native advertising. And most people probably don't even notice it, but I do. But when it happens in the news, it's usually during the morning show, when they're talking about the latest fashion or the grand opening of some local store. Recently Reddit had an awakening when the guys over at Point made a video describing how they bought the top positions on Reddit for relatively cheap. Not only that, but they were able to manipulate the conversations about these topics in order to present them in the best light possible. Since Reddit isn't a news source, it's an online community, most people thought that the conversation was relatively safe. There had been rumors of sponsored content on the website for years, but no real hard evidence until now. So now not only do you have to wonder, why are they telling me this? Are they trying to sell me something? But you also have to look at your online communities and think, a suspiciously high amount of people are supporting this product. I wonder why. And now to quite possibly the worst form of fake news. Hoaxes. Straight up lies and made up stories. This is the type of fake news that most people blame for swaying the election. Someone with an agenda could easily make up a story and before it could be proven false, would have millions of Facebook shares and already be in people's heads as real. Vice News Tonight recently did an interview with Paul Horner, one of the most prolific fake news writers.
I do, I guess, what people would say would be fake news. I write my stories on my sites and then put out my stories on Facebook and different groups, mostly pro-Trump groups. That's who I target a lot of the times, and then they just pass it around thinking that it's true.
This is confirmation bias at its worst. Something you kind of already think might be true is shared to you on Facebook. And now it doesn't matter if it's true or not, in your head, it is.
I had been reading online that Donald Trump supporters actually thought that protesters were getting paid to protest. So I thought I'd write up like a whole story about some white guy getting paid $3,500, and I made up a fake Craigslist ad, and then I just wrote the story, and then it kept getting spread around.
To look at a non-election example, CNN was recently accused of airing 30 minutes of transsexual porn on Thanksgiving. H3H3 did a pretty good synopsis of this story, but the story went viral and appeared on several news websites including Fox News and the New York Post. Of course, CNN didn't air porn, millions of people would have seen it. Instead, all of these fake news stories were based on one tweet saying CNN is straight up porn right now. The account no longer exists, probably because of how much attention and hate they were getting. But by the time it was proven false, people on Reddit and Facebook had been sharing it so much it transformed into 30 minutes of transsexual porn. And now that people think it's funny, there are several photoshopped images of porn with the CNN logo at the bottom, all claiming to be the actual image of the event. This is the danger of hoaxes and fake news. If you went up and asked someone, hey, do you remember that time CNN aired 30 minutes of porn? They'd probably say yes, even if they don't actually remember it, which is even worse. But check out my memory errors video if you want to know more about that. That was a pretty innocent and funny example though. But do you remember that time Hillary Clinton called Bernie Sanders supporters and all millennials a bucket of losers?
Breaking tonight, another big story playing out on the 2016 campaign trail in addition to the Trump tape, and this one involves Hillary Clinton. WikiLeaks published what it claims are transcripts from closed-door speeches that Hillary Clinton gave to Wall Street executives.
Megyn, Hillary Clinton and her campaign have repeatedly refused to release the transcripts of her speeches, and political analysts say these leaked excerpts are likely the reason why, including where she apparently called Bernie Sanders supporters a, quote, bucket of losers.
You shouldn't, because it didn't happen. The WikiLeaks transcript of the Goldman Sachs speech doesn't exist. WikiLeaks didn't even put it out. It was fake. It was faked at the same time WikiLeaks did release a bunch of DNC emails, but none of them included a Goldman Sachs script. But since it did kind of sound like something she did actually say when she said some Trump supporters were in a basket of deplorables, people ran with it. Only this time she was attacking her own base rather than the competition. And this is the kind of fake news story that helped turn the election. Some troll is probably patting himself on the back for getting his fake story on Fox News, not realizing what kind of damage he probably caused. But let's talk about the non-damaging type of fake news. Satire. Fake news that's just meant to be funny. Prime example, The Onion. Horrible example, The Daily Show and John Oliver. Those are not satire, those are real news stories presented in a funny way. Calling them satire is just a way to dismiss them. Satire is rarely damaging. Mostly it's just embarrassing for the person who shares the story on Facebook without realizing that the source is The Onion. But it can be damaging in a social context. The kind of thing that makes sweet apple people look at sour apple people and think they must all be morons. Here's another non-news example.
I had fun tonight.
I had fun too. Is that a gun in your pants, or are you just happy to see me?
It's
Cringe.
actually Glock 19.
Are you kidding me? My life has been in danger this entire time.
Called a CHL, and this is.
This video was shared on Facebook like 1 billion times, and it's a perfect example of when satire goes wrong. It starts off with a fairly rational complaint. If you're on a first date with someone in broad daylight and you find out that they have a gun stuffed in their pants, you probably have the right to be a little concerned, maybe even offended. But that's where the rationalism ends. Then they blow it up by making her anti-American, anti-gun, and generally an idiot. And by extension, this makes anybody who's for a little bit of gun control part of a bucket of losers. By the way, I'm not entirely sure why this type of political commentary needs to be injected into an ad for coffee. I'm totally serious.
I didn't even shoot her. Her head exploded from logic.
That took a left turn.
Satire is supposed to be funny and perhaps provide a little bit of social commentary. It's not supposed to make one group of people look down on another group of people. That sort of stuff is harmful because it makes any sort of compromise impossible. Now you're probably saying to yourself, geez, this guy can't take a joke. Yes, I can take a joke, I'm really funny, okay? The problem is, while this is supposed to be a joke, it's logged in your memory as another time a liberal gun hater was being an idiot. We all do this, and it's easily done with any social or political issue, even when it's not satire. Whenever you have a stereotype about a group of people, you've probably had very few in-person interactions like that. Instead, you saw it on TV or heard it through a friend of a friend, and it's logged in your memory as something that happened to you. Anyway, back on topic. So who is to blame for all of this fake news, sensationalism, and bias? Advertisers? Special interest groups? The news? Or us? Special interests and advertisers obviously have a sinister goal. They're pushing a product or political agenda. The news is playing along with these goals because they need money. Because if they weren't flashy and sensational, we wouldn't watch. Is it our fault for liking apples the way we like them, so we seek out those apples? Or is it the news's fault for giving us the apples we want rather than the apples we need? The blame is probably spread around, but the central conduit is the news. If we can't trust the news to give us the stories that we need to know without sensationalizing them or reporting false stories, then we have no good source of information. Journalism used to be a public service, a noble profession and a necessary part of our democracy. And over the last few years, we've seen that slowly break down. People still want to trust the news, but the news has become increasingly untrustworthy. So the next time you hear a story that's just a little too ridiculous to be true, go to Snopes, okay? Just go to Snopes. Don't share it, please, because now you know better. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that video or you learned something, make sure to give that like button a click. If you'd like to see more from me, I put out new videos every weekend, so make sure to falsely share that subscribe button. I'm almost at 500 subscribers, so be on the lookout for some bloopers soon. But in the meantime, if you'd like to see one of my older videos, how about this one?
He does a lot of different topics about things that, you know, tends to get you to think about stuff, whether you heard something and you're not sure if it's true or not. He has one video about subjugating the narrative, and it talks about Holocaust deniers and you know, Civil War and things like that. He has another one about victimization and about the narrative about changing the way Japan is viewed after World War II and things like that. Like, he's pretty deep. And I was about to say, what I was about to talk about as far as fake news and everything, a lot of people tend to call things fake news, even though it's technically not. Like, for example, whether it's MSNBC or Fox News or anything like that, a lot of times you'll hear something on one of those shows and you'll think of it as like, oh, well, they're spreading fake news because they usually say stuff that I don't like or something like that. Usually what they do is they don't tend to say fake news, but what they'll do is they'll change the narrative so that it fits what they want to present. Like, the video made a good example. Like, one thing says, oh, Obama has renovated healthcare and it's helping millions, and another person says, oh, it's a government takeover of healthcare and Obama is trying to destroy the public sector and things like that. Like, technically, the facts in the story, Obama doing something with healthcare, and like, that's true. Only thing is you have to try to weed through the narratives and the bias and try to find the truth. Usually, if people can like look into that, they tend to be more well informed and stuff. Don't just read the headline and think, oh, well, that is the news story. Actually go into it and look into it. I was about to say something about like politics. I don't mind getting into politics, but I just wanted to, you know, say something real quick about politics. A lot of times, like, even with as far as narratives, you hear stuff from certain candidates and things like that, and it makes you think, oh, well, you know, they're always wrong because they've been wrong about these things, and thus they're always wrong, whatever. Like, if you're going to be one of those type of people that hates a politician, fine, more all the power to you. But hate them for reasonable reasons. Like, it kills me when I hear people talk about how they just flat out hate Obama because he was the worst president ever. Statistically, he wasn't the worst president. Get that out of here. He absolutely isn't. But at the same time, from a technical standpoint, Donald Trump also isn't the worst president. Now, you might want to say he's the worst moral president or whatever else, if that's your argument, whatever. But from a statistic standpoint, he's not the worst president. With me, it's like, I don't like listening to people that tend to overreact to certain things, because chances are, if you look at everything around you, the world is still turning. The apocalypse hasn't happened. The universe isn't on fire. The animals aren't dead. Like, chances are you're going to survive, so calm down. And also, people that tend to be hypocritical. Like, it's one thing if you don't like what someone does, but don't change the way you believe stuff simply because it's different now. Like, if you had a problem with Obama doing something and Trump does it, don't all of a sudden act like it's normal now. And at the same time, if you didn't have a problem with Obama or something related to Obama doing something, don't get mad because Trump is doing it. Like, for example, there was a big issue back when Obama was president about his wife Michelle, and she had worn a dress that didn't show her arms or something, like, or that showed her arms or showed too much arm or something, and everybody was going, oh, how dare she is showing off too much, this, that, and the other. And with me, I didn't give a damn. I just flat out didn't care. It's a non-issue. And now, with when Trump first became president, there was this big issue about his wife posing nude and things like that. And people were saying, oh, well, y'all are giving shit for Michelle and this and that, which is a okay argument. But at the same time, I didn't care about Michelle. I don't care about Melania. Like, it's irrelevant. If one didn't bother me, this one doesn't bother me at all neither. This one's a little more on an extreme side than this one, but either way, I don't give a damn. It has nothing to do with my life, nothing to do with the presidency. I don't care. And hopefully, I would hope more people would have that opinion. Anyway, that's been my discussion. That's just my opinion about everything. Maybe you have something different. If you do, leave it in the comment section down below. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share. I'm going to move on to the next video. That's been the original Renaissance man, Devon DaVinci. I'm signing out. Deuces.